On a cold winter morning in the heart of Millbrook, Massachusetts, the town square stood still under a blanket of snow. The only sign of life was the slow march of time across the frozen streets. But amidst the quiet, a peculiar sight had drawn the attention of the locals for weeks. A German shepherd, weary yet steadfast, sitting at the edge of a rusted sewer grate. His amber eyes were fixed, unwavering, as if guarding a secret only he could understand. Every day, without fail, the dog, known only to them as Atlas, appeared precisely at dawn, taking his place beside the grate, refusing to leave until dusk painted the sky in hues of purple and gold. His ritual was met with quiet whispers from shopkeepers and concerned passers-by, who noticed his demeanor had changed. Once proud, Atlas now bore the scars of abandonment, his once majestic coat matted, his gait marked by a pronounced limp. Yet it was not his physical state that drew attention. It was his unshakable dedication, his silent vigil that seemed to carry an air of mystery. Welcome to the Heart Force channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video. And if you have any dog stories of your own, feel free to share them with everyone. Despite the cold, Atlas never asked for food. When it was offered, he would take it, only to disappear for a brief moment before returning with an empty mouth, his eyes still locked on the grate below him. The townsfolk speculated about the strange behavior, but no one dared to venture closer. That is, until Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's local veterinarian, happened upon the scene one chilly December morning. What she would discover that day would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, sacrifice, and the unspoken bonds that tie us together. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's veterinary clinic was located just 2 blocks from Millbrook's town square, nestled in a converted Victorian house that had seen decades of change. She had moved to Millbrook 6 years ago, drawn to its quiet charm and the promise of a fresh start after the loss of her beloved dog, Max. The clinic was more than just a place of healing. It was a reflection of Sarah herself. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature gray, was often pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes, sharp and full of wisdom, held the weight of countless decisions, many of them hard, some heartbreaking. When she had lost Max 6 months ago, it felt as though part of her had gone with him. The gentle, steady presence of her Labrador retriever had seen her through many trying moments, both professional and personal. Max had been more than just a companion. He had been a co-therapist, guiding her patients through their darkest times with the same unwavering kindness he had shown her. His death in a hit-and-run accident had left a void that nothing could fill. But as she drove through Millbrook on that December morning, her mind wandered to the dog on Mason Street. The German shepherd, Atlas, had become a local legend. Sarah had heard the whispers, the dog who wouldn't leave the sewer grate, the dog who seemed to watch over something beneath the ground. She had watched him from her clinic window many times, but never dared to approach. He wasn't just a stray. The way he carried himself, his gaze so alert, his posture so commanding, spoke of a past far beyond his current circumstances. That morning, Sarah received an unexpected call. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly owner of the bakery across the street, was frantic. "Dr. Mitchell, it's Atlas. He's hurt badly. You have to come quickly." Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and rushed out the door. The cold winter air nipped at her face as Mrs. Henderson hurried to explain. "He's limping, bleeding. It's bad, Dr. Mitchell." They found Atlas where he always was, at the edge of the sewer grate. But today he was different. His proud posture was gone. He lay crumpled, his breathing labored, one paw pressed tightly against his chest, as if trying to protect something even in his pain. There was a new wound on his shoulder, a deep, raw gash that looked like it had been caused by a violent encounter with another dog. Sarah knelt beside him, her breath clouding in the cold air. She examined the wound with practiced hands, noting the severity. But as she tried to coax him away from the grate to treat his injuries, he refused to move. His eyes met hers, and, for the first time, she saw something there that stopped her cold determination. It wasn't aggression. It was purpose. "Atlas," Sarah whispered, her voice soft but firm. "You're hurt. Let me help you." But Atlas didn't budge. His paw stayed firmly planted by the grate, and when Sarah tried to gently nudge him away, he raised his injured leg and touched her hand. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a fleeting moment, she understood. He wasn't trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect something or someone beneath the street. In that moment, everything changed. Sarah felt a stirring in her heart, a connection to this dog that she couldn't explain. It was the same feeling she had experienced when Max had first shown her that animals were more than just pets. They were teachers, guides, and in some cases, heroes. As Sarah treated his injuries, she made a decision. She would find out what Atlas was guarding. That night, as Sarah reflected on the events of the day, she couldn't shake the image of Atlas's eyes. They were full of intelligence, sadness, and something more, something ancient. It was clear that he was no ordinary dog. There was more to him, something hidden beneath the surface, something he wasn't ready to share yet. The next morning, she watched as Atlas returned to his post at the grate. True to his routine, he appeared at exactly 8 a.m., his gaze locked on the darkness beneath him. When Thomas Mason, the butcher, appeared with his usual offering of scraps, Atlas took the food, but he didn't eat it. Instead, he disappeared behind the nearby building, returning minutes later to take the remaining pieces. Sarah's curiosity grew. What was Atlas doing? Why wasn't he eating the food? Then she saw it. Atlas approached the grate again, and with methodical precision, he began lowering pieces of meat through the metal bars. One by one, he placed the pieces into the dark void below. When he was finished, he sat down beside the grate, waiting. A soft whimper echoed from below, and Atlas's ears perked up, his body tense with anticipation. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Atlas wasn't just feeding someone. He was taking care of something. As she watched from her clinic window, Sarah realized that Atlas was doing something no other dog in Millbrook had ever done. He wasn't just surviving. He was protecting. But what was he protecting? And why had he chosen the sewer grate as his place of vigil? She made up her mind. She had to find out. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Despite the cold and snow, she couldn't shake the mystery of Atlas's daily ritual. She had seen dogs in her practice with strange behaviors, strays who had been traumatized, abandoned, or hurt, but never had she seen such devotion. Atlas wasn't just surviving. He was protecting something, and Sarah was determined to uncover what it was. Every morning at 8 a.m., Atlas appeared by the sewer grate. Every morning, Thomas Mason, the town's butcher, would leave fresh scraps of meat for the dog. And every morning, Atlas would take a portion, disappear for a few minutes, then return to the grate to resume his vigil. No one had ever seen him eat. He didn't look for comfort or warmth from the food. It was as though he was merely fulfilling a duty, and Sarah knew that duty was far from ordinary. One chilly morning, Sarah decided to follow Atlas. She kept a safe distance as the dog moved with purpose, his limp more pronounced as he walked. Atlas had clearly seen better days, yet there was a quiet nobility in his movements. He wasn't just a dog. He was something more, something greater. As Sarah watched him disappear behind the butcher shop, she felt the weight of her own personal loss. It had been 6 months since Max had passed, and while she had moved on in many ways, there were still moments where the grief would creep in uninvited. It was in those moments that Sarah would think of Atlas, this dog who had been through so much and yet still carried himself with purpose. Sarah trailed Atlas at a respectful distance as he walked behind the shop and turned down a narrow alleyway. She kept her eyes on him, watching as he approached the familiar sewer grate. But this time, something was different. This time, Sarah saw what Atlas was guarding. As Atlas lowered his head and gently dropped the food through the grate, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The soft whimper she had heard the day before echoed from below, followed by the faint sound of movement. Atlas's ears perked up, his body stiffening as if receiving confirmation that his offering had been accepted. In that moment, Sarah realized something she had suspected for days. Atlas wasn't just feeding strays or animals he had found. He was keeping something alive, something that needed more than food. It needed care. It needed attention. It needed to be protected. Sarah stayed hidden in the shadows, not wanting to disturb the scene unfolding before her. She had always been a woman of science, of logic, and of reason. But what she was witnessing now didn't fit into any of her neat little boxes. The dedication of this dog, his silent watchfulness, was a form of care that transcended what most people thought animals were capable of. And the more she watched, the more she realized that Atlas wasn't just doing this for survival or out of routine. He was doing it out of a deep, unspoken bond, one that even she, as a veterinarian, couldn't fully comprehend. The next few days saw Sarah returning to the alleyway every morning, observing Atlas from a distance. Each time, she saw the same ritual unfold. Atlas feeding, waiting, and listening. But this time, she didn't just watch. She began to document everything. Her clinic journal, once a simple record of medical procedures, became a log of something far more profound. She wrote about the way Atlas approached the great, the precision with which he fed the unseen creature below, and the way he would wait patiently for the whimpers in return. On the 5th day of her observation, Sarah was certain of one thing. Atlas was not only protecting something down there, but he was also doing so with a level of devotion that rivaled the most heroic of acts. Whatever lived beneath the street, Atlas had chosen to become its guardian. Sarah's professional curiosity grew, but so did her personal connection to this dog. She had spent years working with animals, but this was different. This wasn't just about treating an injury or administering medicine. This was about understanding a dog's purpose, about uncovering the bond between creatures that had been lost. A bond that seemed to transcend species, time, and pain. It wasn't long before Sarah decided to take action. Armed with her medical kit, she ventured to the sewer grate one evening after closing the clinic. It was then that she saw Atlas once more, sitting at his post, his body still and focused. The glow of the streetlights cast long shadows across his figure, and in the dim light, she saw something she had missed before. A scar on his right flank, a limp in his gait, a weariness that only time and experience could bring. "Atlas," Sarah whispered softly, her voice carrying over the quiet streets. "I know you're not just a stray. You've been through something. I'll help you." But Atlas didn't move. His eyes were fixed, still locked on the sewer grate below. He wasn't guarding himself. He wasn't even guarding food or shelter. He was guarding a secret. One that only he knew and one that Sarah was determined to uncover. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, stepping closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch the dog's head. But Atlas, as if understanding her words, gave a low growl, a warning. Not an aggressive growl, but one that carried a clear message. "I'm not leaving. I'm not moving." Sarah stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. What was Atlas guarding? And why was he willing to endure so much for it? She knew the answers were just out of reach, but she also knew one thing for sure. She had to help him, whatever it took. With a deep breath, Sarah knelt beside him, her hand resting on his matted fur. "I'll be here with you," she whispered. "Together, we'll figure this out." The days following her decision to help Atlas were filled with a quiet, urgent anticipation. Sarah continued her daily observations, trying to piece together the mystery that had captivated her thoughts since the first time she saw Atlas sitting vigil by the sewer grate. She had treated hundreds of animals, strays, rescues, and those in need of care, but never had she encountered anything like this. The dog's determination, his dedication, was unlike any she had seen before. It wasn't just that Atlas was guarding the grate. It was how he did it, how he fed the unseen creature below with such care, never once taking more than what was necessary, and how he returned day after day, despite the harsh cold and his own physical pain. Atlas had suffered. His body bore the scars of his past, a gash along his right flank, a limp that told of an injury he had never fully recovered from. Yet, there was a sense of nobility about him that Sarah couldn't quite place. This wasn't just the behavior of a stray dog. This was the behavior of a dog on a mission. One morning, after days of watching Atlas and making notes in her journal, Sarah decided she could wait no longer. She had to know what lay beneath the grate, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. This wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a mystery, and mysteries required a careful approach. She called James Wilson, the town's animal control officer, hoping that his experience might help in case the situation turned dangerous. Though she had tried to discuss her concerns with him before, he had been dismissive. "It's just a stray, Sarah," he had told her. "A dog trying to protect its turf. Nothing more." But now she knew better. "I'm telling you, James, there's something down there. I've seen it," Sarah urged as she reached him on the phone. "This dog, Atlas, he's not just feeding strays. He's guarding something." After a moment of silence, James responded with an uncertain tone. "All right, I'll meet you there, but I still think you're overthinking this. We'll bring the heavy equipment, just in case, but I don't know what we'll find." They arrived at the sewer grate at dusk, with Sarah clutching her emergency kit and James hauling his tools. The town was quiet, the streets eerily still, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Alice was already there, of course, his watchful eyes scanning the area. His gaze locked on Sarah as she approached, his body stiffening, the low growl rumbling in his throat. "It's okay, boy," Sarah spoke softly, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm not here to take away your job. I just need to know what you're protecting." For the first time, Atlas didn't growl. Instead, he stepped aside, though his eyes never left her. He wasn't leaving. He was allowing her to approach, under his watchful gaze. James stood behind Sarah, clearly unsure of what to do. "You sure about this?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "We need to find out what's down there, James. It's more than just a stray. Atlas is guarding something, and I think it's alive." Carefully, Sarah knelt beside the grate, shining her flashlight through the metal slats. At first, she saw nothing, just the darkness beneath the street. But then, a faint movement caught her eye. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in the shadows, she saw two small eyes gleaming in the dark. "It's alive," Sarah whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her heart raced. She had been right. Alice wasn't just guarding a space. He was guarding life. "Hold on," she called to James, her voice trembling with excitement. "We need to get this grate off. Now." James hesitated, but quickly understood the urgency. Together, they worked to lift the heavy grate, the metal groaning under their combined strength. As it shifted, a soft, pitiful mewing echoed from below. "That's a cat," James exclaimed. "What the hell is a cat doing down there?" Sarah's hands shook with anticipation, but she didn't stop. She had to be sure. They lifted the grate fully, and as the light from their flashlights spread into the darkness below, they saw it. 5 tiny kittens huddled on a small ledge just below street level, their fur matted and their tiny bodies trembling. A piece of corrugated metal had been carefully placed above them, keeping them dry and protected. "Sarah, how did they get down there?" James asked, incredulous. "I don't know," Sarah replied, kneeling beside the ledge and reaching down to gently scoop the kittens into her arms. They were weak, hungry, and frightened, but they were alive. Alive because Atlas had kept them safe. But the question still lingered. How had these kittens ended up in the sewer, and why had Atlas chosen to protect them? As Sarah held the kittens, she felt a connection to them, a sense of purpose that resonated deeply within her. This wasn't just a rescue. It was something more. As she carefully examined the kittens and checked their condition, it became clear that without Atlas, they wouldn't have survived. They had been cared for in a way that was far beyond the ordinary. Atlas hadn't just fed them. He had nurtured them, offering his warmth and his protection in a place where no one else would have dared to go. And in return, they had given him something he hadn't had in a long time: purpose. Atlas had been a hero once, but now, in the quiet corners of Millbrook, he had become something even greater. He was a guardian, a protector, and a teacher, and the town was starting to realize it. The town of Millbrook was never the same after the discovery beneath the sewer grate. What had begun as a quiet mystery, a lone dog guarding the darkness, had turned into something much larger, something that would bring the community together in a way no one had expected. Dr. Sarah Mitchell spent the next few days working tirelessly to care for the kittens. Atlas had done everything he could to keep them alive, but they still needed medical attention. The smallest one, a fragile white kitten with patches of gray, was in critical condition. She had been the weakest of the five, struggling to maintain her body temperature and breathing with shallow, labored gasps. Sarah worked through the nights, monitoring their progress, and with each passing hour, she marveled at the bond between Atlas and the kittens. He never left their side, his eyes never straying from the recovery room window. He was more than just a caretaker. He was a symbol, a reminder that love and dedication could transcend species, that even in the darkest places, there was hope. As Sarah worked with the kittens, word of the rescue spread quickly through the town. People began showing up at her clinic, offering help in ways she never imagined. Thomas Mason, the butcher who had first noticed Atlas's feeding ritual, brought over a truckload of supplies for the animals. Mrs. Henderson, the bakery owner, sent over fresh pastries for the staff, her way of showing support. And even James Wilson, the animal control officer who had once dismissed Sarah's concerns, began offering his help in any way he could. It wasn't just that they wanted to help Atlas and the kittens. It was the way the entire town seemed to rally behind them. People who had once kept to themselves began talking, sharing stories about the dog who had become their hero. The butcher, Thomas, who had been the first to offer Atlas food, stood before the town council one evening and spoke passionately about the dog's selfless actions. If a dog like this, Thomas said, his voice steady, can show this much dedication, then we owe it to ourselves to do better. We need to care for the strays in this town, and not just the ones we think are worthy of it. Every life has value. Alice has shown us that. The town council, hearing this plea, began considering changes to the town's animal welfare policies. They set up a community fund to help support strays, ensuring that abandoned animals wouldn't be forgotten. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the shift in perspective that had taken place in Millbrook. The town, once closed off and indifferent to the struggles of the unseen, had opened its heart. Atlas had become more than just a dog. He had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of compassion. He had proven that even in the most dire circumstances, there was always a way forward. He had saved the kittens, yes, but he had done something even more important. He had saved the people of Millbrook from their own indifference. One evening, after the town's meeting, Sarah stood in front of the clinic, looking out over the street. The sky had turned a deep purple as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. In the distance, she could see Atlas sitting by the clinic window, his posture still proud, his eyes locked on the recovery room where the kittens slept. He hadn't left them since the day they were rescued. The clinic had become a sanctuary, not just for the animals, but for the people of Millbrook as well. It was where they came to witness the miracle of life and healing. It was where they came to learn that compassion didn't have to be confined to the pages of a textbook or the walls of a clinic. Compassion could be shown through action, through a dog's daily vigil, and through the way a community came together to heal. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always known the power of healing, but she had never seen anything like this before. Atlas had taught her more than any medical book ever could. He had shown her that healing wasn't just about fixing broken bodies. It was about restoring dignity, about offering protection and care to those who needed it most, no matter how small or broken they might be. As Sarah stood there, looking out over the clinic, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She thought of Max, her own dog who had passed away so suddenly. She thought of how Atlas, a dog who had been abandoned and forgotten, had found a way to heal not just the kittens, but her too. And then, as if on cue, she saw Atlas rise from his spot by the window. His body moved with purpose. His gait a little slower, now due to the wear and tear of age and injury, but still full of strength. He approached her slowly, his eyes soft but filled with quiet confidence. When he reached her, he sat at her feet and looked up at her, as if to say, "I've done my job. Now it's your turn." Sarah knelt down and placed her hand gently on his head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers. In that moment, she realized that Atlas had given her something she had lost when Max died: hope. He had shown her that there was still good in the world, still purpose in every life. He had reminded her that no matter how much we may hurt, there is always something worth fighting for. "Thank you, Atlas," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for showing us what it means to love." It had been several weeks since the night the kittens were rescued, and Millbrook had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Atlas, once a broken hero abandoned by his handler, had become a symbol of resilience and compassion. The town that had once looked the other way now embraced the animals it had once forgotten, and its residents found new meaning in the concept of community. Sarah had seen the change in herself, too. The loss of Max had left an empty space in her heart. But caring for Atlas and the kittens had filled that void in a way she hadn't expected. She had learned that healing wasn't a straightforward path. It was filled with twists, turns, and unexpected moments of grace. Atlas had taught her that the greatest strength didn't come from physical power, but from the strength of commitment and love, the ability to give everything for someone else, even when you had nothing left to give. Now, as spring approached, Sarah stood outside the newly built Millbrook Animal Rehabilitation Center, which had been founded in part by Atlas's story. The center was a state-of-the-art facility that would serve as a model for animal care in the region. But more than that, it was a place where compassion, healing, and education came together to form a new vision of what it meant to care for animals. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for that afternoon, and Sarah was filled with a mixture of pride and humility. The community had rallied around Atlas and the work he had inspired, but it was more than just the success of the center. It was the transformation in the hearts of the people who lived here. Millbrook had learned, through one dog's simple yet powerful example, that love could heal not just individuals, but entire communities. As Sarah walked into the center, Atlas followed her, his presence as dignified as ever. His gray muzzle and slower gait betrayed the years he had spent serving, but his eyes still shone with purpose. He moved quietly through the center, his head held high, as if to say, "This is my legacy. This is what I've given." Inside the building, the kittens who had once been so fragile were now thriving. They had been adopted into loving homes, their health restored by the collective care of Sarah and the community. But even more than their physical recovery, they had given something back to the town, a new understanding of empathy, of connection, and of the importance of caring for those who cannot care for themselves. The opening ceremony was held in the center's main hall, where a crowd of local residents, veterinarians, animal welfare advocates, and media representatives had gathered. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, each one reflecting the hope and transformation that had taken place over the past few months. "Thank you all for being here today," Sarah began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We stand here today because of one dog, Atlas, and the incredible love and dedication he showed us all. His journey has been one of unimaginable hardship, but through it, he has given us a gift, a lesson in compassion, sacrifice, and the power of purpose." She paused, glancing down at Atlas, who sat beside her, his eyes locked on hers with an understanding that transcended words. Atlas showed us that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, and giving everything you have for someone who needs it. His mission was never about recognition or reward. It was about protecting life, no matter the cost. The crowd was silent, listening intently as Sarah spoke, but it wasn't just her words that moved them. It was the presence of Atlas, the dog who had made all of this possible, sitting calmly beside her, his head held high. Sarah continued, "We've learned that true service comes not from what you're trained to do, but from the heart. Atlas has given us a new perspective on what it means to serve, to care, and to love. He's shown us that we all have something to give, no matter our past or our limitations." As she spoke, Sarah's mind drifted back to the lessons Atlas had taught her, the importance of not just caring for the physical needs of those in her charge, but of offering them the respect and dignity they deserved. Atlas had not just saved the kittens, he had saved her. He had helped her move beyond her own grief. Or for the new center, but for Atlas, who had been the catalyst for this change, whose silent vigil had sparked a revolution in how the town of Millbrook cared for its animals. As Sarah stepped down from the podium, Atlas stood and moved toward the door of the center. He had done his part. It was time for him to rest. But as he passed through the doorway, he stopped for a moment, looking back at the crowd. His eyes met Sarah's, and she smiled softly. In that brief exchange, Sarah understood something profound. Atlas wasn't leaving. He had done what he was meant to do, and now he would continue to live out his legacy in quiet, dignified service. The door closed softly behind him, and the ceremony continued. But Millbrook had changed forever. The story of one dog's dedication had touched the hearts of many, and in the days, months, and years to come, the town would carry that lesson with them. Atlas had shown them that there was no such thing as a life too small to matter, and no such thing as a heart too broken to heal. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting a warm golden light over the newly opened rehabilitation center, Sarah stood on the steps, watching the last rays of the day stretch long across the horizon. She thought of Max, of the lost years, of the grief that had nearly consumed her, and she realized that Atlas had not only restored the lives of those kittens, but had restored her own sense of purpose. She had learned that in giving, we find ourselves, and in serving, we heal. As we reflect on Atlas's journey, we are reminded that true healing comes from the heart. It's not about our past or our limitations. It's about the love and commitment we show to others, especially those who need it most. Atlas's legacy teaches us that even in our darkest moments, there is purpose and light to be found. His story is a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the profound impact one life can have on an entire community. What did you think of Atlas's story? Do you have a dog who has made a difference in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel for more inspiring stories like this one. We look forward to hearing from you. The sky had already begun to darken. The first signs of a storm hanging heavy in the air as Officer Eden Carter's funeral procession slowly made its way to Oak Hill Cemetery. A gentle, yet relentless rain fell, matching the sorrow of the gathered mourners. The quiet whimpers of the K-9 officer, Max, filled the air as his dark eyes searched the horizon, looking for something that was now gone. The bond between them was more than just work. It was the unspoken, deep connection of a man and his dog, a connection forged through shared battles and the echoes of pain and loyalty. As the ceremony continued, Max's behavior began to shift. His usual calm and controlled demeanor was replaced with frantic movements. His bark broke the silence, rising above the quiet murmurs of the crowd. With every desperate growl, he circled the oak coffin, his paws scraping at the lid as though trying to claw his way inside. The gathered mourners, sensing something was terribly wrong, stepped back in fear. Then, Carter's mother, Margaret, stood, her face etched with grief but determination in her eyes. She looked at the funeral director and spoke words that would change everything. "Open it." The director hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. But with a reluctant nod, he complied. As the lid of the coffin creaked open, gasps echoed through the crowd, turning to horrified screams as the truth became apparent. The man inside the coffin was not Officer Eden Carter. Welcome to Heart Force Channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The atmosphere in the chapel was thick with confusion, grief, and disbelief. The mourners had come to pay their final respects to Officer Eden Carter, a man known for his courage and his unwavering commitment to the law. But as they stood there in shock, the truth was dawning. The man they were about to bury wasn't Eden Carter at all. The body in the coffin had been misidentified. Max, the German shepherd who had once stood tall and proud by his handler's side, now stood trembling. His fur, damp from the rain, seemed to cling to his bones. His eyes, usually sharp with focus, now held a depth of sadness that no one could fully comprehend. His instinct told him something was wrong, but he couldn't understand why. As the funeral director backed away, and the police officers around them began to murmur in disbelief, Margaret Carter's face remained stoic. Despite the shock of losing her son and the chaos unfolding around her, her resolve was unshakable. She knew something the others did not. She knew Max, the canine, and she trusted his instincts with all her heart. In that moment, she understood the bond between a dog and its handler, a bond so deep that even death couldn't sever it. Max's frantic barking and his urgent attempts to dig at the coffin had not been out of grief alone. There was something else at play. He wasn't just mourning Eden's death. He was trying to tell them the truth. Margaret's heart raced as she approached the open coffin. She had seen the way Max reacted when they arrived at the hospital the night of the warehouse incident. There was always a quiet, undying loyalty between them, but this was different. It was as though Max had known something they hadn't. "Open it," Margaret repeated. "Max is trying to tell us something." The funeral director, who had been silently observing the scene unfold, took a step back. He knew better than to argue with a mother who had lost so much, especially one who had witnessed firsthand the bond between a dog and its handler. Slowly, with trembling hands, he raised the lid of the coffin further. The rest of the mourners stood frozen, unable to speak, their eyes glued to the scene before them. The room fell silent. Inside the coffin, the body that lay there had a striking resemblance to Officer Carter, but it wasn't him. As the realization spread, gasps of disbelief swept through the crowd. This wasn't Carter. This was someone else entirely. The shock rippled through the mourners, but the one who reacted most fiercely was Max. His barking, once urgent and frantic, turned to a mournful howl. He stepped forward, nuzzling the body as if trying to awaken the person who was supposed to be there. But it was too late. Max's unyielding loyalty, his bond with Eden, and his relentless desire to protect. These were the things that had always defined him. But now, something else stirred within him. A dog could sense when something was wrong. Max had always trusted Eden's guidance, his commands, his every move. But in that moment, Max realized that the one who had been by his side for years, the one who had shared his victories and defeats, was never coming back. And now, an even deeper truth hung in the air. Margaret Carter, her voice shaking with emotion but firm in its conviction, spoke to the officers who stood frozen around her. "This is a mistake," she said, her words low but clear. "I'm going to find my son, and I'm going to make sure that Max is with me every step of the way." Max, sensing the urgency in her voice, calmed down. His ears perked up as he stood at attention, looking up at her with eyes that reflected both sadness and a promise of loyalty. Without another word, he moved to stand by her side, as if to say that no matter the obstacles ahead, they would face them together. As the police officers began to shuffle around, calling in for clarification and attempting to make sense of what had just transpired, Margaret Carter turned toward the chapel's exit. With Max by her side, they stepped into the unknown. The mystery of Eden's supposed death had just begun. But one thing was certain: Max would be there, a silent sentinel in the storm, ready to uncover the truth. The rain continued to fall as Officer Margaret Carter made her way out of the chapel with Max by her side. She had felt the profound presence of her son's spirit in that moment, but she also understood that something much darker had occurred, something no one could have anticipated. The body in the coffin was not her son, Eden, and in her heart, she knew that Max was the key to unlocking the truth. Max walked solemnly beside her, his stride calm but deliberate. Despite the chaos that had unfolded Just moments ago, his loyalty had never wavered. He wasn't just following a command or duty. He was following something deeper, something instinctual that even his handler had come to trust with her very life. Dogs, she knew, could sense when things weren't right. Max's bark, his howls, his refusal to leave Eden's side. It wasn't just grief. It was a warning. Margaret's heart raced, but her mind was clear. She needed to find her son, to understand what had truly happened, and to uncover the web of deception that had led them to this point. The police department was in disarray, scrambling to figure out what went wrong. But none of them had the relationship with Eden and Max that Margaret did. She had seen the unspoken trust between them. His dark eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw a flicker of understanding there. He was ready to help her find the truth, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. It wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about something greater. Max, she whispered softly, we're going to get to the bottom of this. You and me together. The words were a promise. A promise to Max, to herself, and to Eden. The following days were a blur of confusion, anger, and disbelief. Margaret and Max stood at the heart of it all, a steady force in the storm. The police department had gone into full investigation mode, but as Margaret watched the officers scramble, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking in all the wrong places. The truth wasn't in the evidence they were reviewing. It was in the bond between a dog and his handler. And Max knew that bond better than anyone. Max's behavior had not been erratic. It had been purposeful. He had been trying to tell them something, and Margaret was the only one who truly understood it. While the investigation teams analyzed surveillance footage, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed the chaos of the warehouse operation, Max remained by Margaret's side, silent but ever watchful. His eyes, though weary from the long days, remained sharp, as though piecing together the puzzle in his own way. It wasn't long before Margaret took matters into her own hands. She visited the precinct to speak directly with Officer Thompson, a man who had been close to Eden and Max during their final moments together. But even as she walked through the precinct's halls, a strange sense of unease crept up on her. There was something about the atmosphere, something that felt off, even beyond the incident. As she entered the briefing room, she was greeted by Sergeant Miller, the supervisor of the K-9 unit. His expression was grave, but he made no attempt to hide his concern. "Margaret, we're doing everything we can," he assured her, his voice heavy with a sincerity that almost felt rehearsed. Margaret looked at him sharply. "This isn't about doing everything you can," she said. "This is about finding the truth, about finding Eden, and you're all missing it. The answer isn't in the paperwork. It's in the heart of this dog." She gestured to Max, who stood at attention beside her. His eyes were calm, but his stance was rigid. He was waiting for her command. But Margaret didn't give one. She had already seen the way Max responded to certain officers, the way he reacted to certain situations. He was a soldier, a protector, a sentry, and he had instincts that no amount of training could replace. Sergeant Miller shifted uneasily. He had worked alongside Max and Eden for years. But even he wasn't ready to consider that the key to this investigation might lie in a K-9 officer's behavior. "You're not the only one grieving, Margaret," Miller said quietly. "We all are. But you have to trust us. We're working as fast as we can." Margaret nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere. "I trust Max," she said firmly. "And if we're going to solve this, you should too." The following week was a pivotal moment in the investigation. The police department's detectives had worked tirelessly, pulling every string they could find. Yet the case seemed to be slipping through their fingers. Even the surveillance footage from the warehouse didn't provide any clear answers. There was a sense of something missing, some crucial piece of the puzzle that no one had yet uncovered. That was when Margaret decided to take Max to the hospital where Eden had been treated, where he had been wrongly identified. If there was any chance of uncovering the truth, she believed it would be there. Max, always by her side, remained calm as they entered the building, his body language alert and focused. Dr. Sarah Chin, who had been overseeing Max's recovery from the warehouse incident, greeted them. Her eyes were filled with sympathy, but there was something else there, something like understanding. She had seen firsthand how deeply a dog could be affected by the events surrounding his handler. Max was no ordinary dog. He was a soldier in every sense of the word. His bond with Eden was the kind of connection that couldn't be easily explained or replicated, but it was undeniable. Margaret, Dr. Chin began cautiously. I've been reviewing Max's behavior since the incident. He's been different, more anxious than usual, more focused on certain things. I think he knows something that we don't. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Dr. Chin motioned for Margaret to follow her into the back area where Max had been receiving his treatment. As they walked down the hallway, Max seemed to sense that they were getting closer to something. His steps quickened, and his eyes darted from side to side, scanning the area with a heightened intensity. This isn't just about the physical wounds, Margaret, Dr. Chin continued, her voice soft but serious. There's something deeper here. Max has been reacting to certain people and situations in ways that I can't explain. Margaret watched as Max stopped in front of a door, his body rigid. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl, the hairs on his back standing tall. Margaret recognized the signs immediately. Max was trying to tell her something. Who's in that room? She asked urgently. Dr. Chin looked at the door, then back at Margaret. Officer Thompson, she replied. He's been in a coma since the warehouse incident. Margaret's blood ran cold. Something wasn't right. She turned to Max, whose gaze never left the door. Take me to him, Margaret said. Margaret stood at the door of the hospital room, her hand resting on the cold metal handle. Max, ever alert, refused to take his eyes off the space behind it. The growl that had rumbled from his chest earlier now simmered beneath the surface, as if the room itself were charged with a hidden threat. Margaret could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. There was something deeply wrong, something Max sensed that she couldn't yet understand. Max, it's okay, she whispered, more to herself than to the dog. We need to know the truth. We need to know what happened to Eden. Max's tail flicked nervously as she opened the door. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room, but it was the dim light that made the air feel heavy. Officer Michael Thompson lay unconscious, connected to a myriad of medical devices. His breathing was shallow, his face pale, but there was something about him that made Margaret's heart tighten in her chest. Despite the tragedy of the moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was a puzzle piece she had yet to fit into place. Max stepped forward cautiously, his eyes never leaving the prone officer. His paws made no sound on the polished floor, but his body radiated tension. His growl grew louder, more pronounced, as he neared the bed. Margaret placed a hand on Max's back, trying to calm him, but the dog was resolute. He wasn't moving. He wasn't going to leave. Margaret's thoughts raced as she observed the scene before her. Michael Thompson, the rookie officer who had joined the team only a few months before the warehouse incident, was lying in a hospital bed. He had been with Eden and Max in the final moments before the raid. It was Michael who had been assigned to work alongside Max, and it was Michael who had been injured when the mission went wrong. But now, with Eden's body in the wrong coffin, and Max's uncharacteristic behavior in this room, a sinking feeling began to settle in her chest. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just that Michael had been close to Eden, it was more than that. Margaret had known her son, Eden, for years. She knew the bond he shared with Max. But this connection was different. This connection was buried under layers of secrecy, and Max knew it. I think he knows something, Dr. Chin said, breaking the silence. She had entered quietly behind Margaret, her voice low but firm. Max has been reacting to him in a way that I haven't seen before. There's an attachment there, but not the kind you'd expect. Margaret glanced back at Dr. Chin, her eyes filled with confusion. What do you mean an attachment? Max is guarding him, Dr. Chin continued, her voice strained. But it's not the usual protective instinct he shows to a fellow officer. This feels different. Max doesn't trust easily, but right now, he's treating Michael as though he's more than just a colleague. He's treating him like someone who has betrayed him. The words hung in the air between them. Margaret didn't know what to make of them, but one thing was becoming clearer by the second. Max's growls, his unease, everything pointed to a deeper story. A secret Max had picked up on that no one else had. Margaret kneeled next to Max, rubbing his ears gently. His eyes softened under her touch, but his vigilance didn't waver. He wasn't just waiting for something to happen. He was anticipating it. "Max, what is it? What do you know?" she whispered. Max's ears twitched at her words, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. But in his silent way, he was telling her everything she needed to know. His loyalty to Eden had always been unshakable. Yet, in this room, with Michael Thompson lying unconscious before her, Margaret knew that the connection between them wasn't just one of mutual respect. It was something darker, something rooted in betrayal. As Margaret rose to her feet, she felt the weight of Max's silent gaze upon her. It was as if he was telling her, without a word, that the investigation had only just begun. Eden's death hadn't been an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated tragedy, and Michael Thompson had played a part in it. The days following that visit were filled with unanswered questions. Margaret and Max returned to the precinct, but the officers seemed more focused on the surface details: the warehouse incident, the botched raid, the mysterious body in the coffin, than on the deeper implications of what had occurred. They didn't understand. They didn't see what Max had sensed. But Margaret did. She spent hours combing through files, records, and surveillance footage. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to come together, she began to uncover troubling patterns. Michael Thompson's sudden rise through the academy, his impeccable record, his connections to the criminal network they had been investigating, and his strange behavior after the warehouse raid. The closer Margaret looked, the more she began to see the outline of a web that had been carefully spun around them. Max, of course, remained by her side, steadfast and loyal, but he was more than just a companion now. He was a partner, one who could see things she couldn't. And he had seen something in Michael Thompson that Margaret had yet to uncover. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the precinct grew quieter, Margaret sat at her desk, flipping through the final reports on the warehouse raid. She paused as her eyes landed on a name that made her blood run cold. Michael Thompson, previous association with criminal syndicates under investigation. The truth was beginning to take shape, and with it, the overwhelming weight of betrayal. The following day, Margaret confronted Michael. She found him in the break room, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something that didn't belong to a man of law. It was guilt. It was fear. It was something darker, something that had been building for years. "Michael," Margaret began, her voice quiet but resolute. "I know what you did." His eyes darted toward Max, who stood quietly at her side, unwavering. Michael's posture stiffened, and for a brief moment, Margaret saw him hesitate. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. "I know what you were planning," Margaret continued, stepping closer, her gaze fixed on him. "I know about the revenge you sought, about the betrayal you were willing to carry out. But you made a choice, didn't you? When it mattered most, you made a choice to protect Eden's life. And that choice has changed everything." Michael's eyes flickered with regret, but also something else, something that told Margaret that he was finally starting to understand what Max had seen all along. The loyalty between a handler and his dog was something that transcended personal agendas, something that even the deepest betrayal couldn't break. "You saved him," Margaret said softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "And that is the choice that will define you." The rain had subsided, leaving a dampness in the air that seemed to settle in the bones. Yet within the precinct, the storm was far from over. The truth was beginning to unravel, but it wasn't just a matter of justice anymore. It was about something deeper, a reckoning. The bond between Max and Margaret, the unspoken connection they shared, was more than just a force of nature. It was a mirror of the choices they now faced. Margaret stood outside Michael Thompson's hospital room, the sound of the storm outside muffled by the heavy door. Max, as always, stood by her side, his eyes sharp, waiting for any sign of a threat. The last few days had been filled with difficult conversations, revelations, and an increasing sense of urgency. Michael's actions had set off a chain of events that no one had predicted. But as Margaret stared at the door, she knew the final act of this tragedy was still unfolding. Michael Thompson had made his choice. He had sacrificed his quest for revenge to save Eden's life. But even that sacrifice didn't come without consequences. Now, with the truth about his involvement in the warehouse incident slowly coming to light, the weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air. Margaret took a deep breath, steadying herself. The medical staff had assured her that Michael would survive. But the emotional toll he had endured was far from over. His recovery was as much about healing his soul as it was about his body. And Margaret knew that the dog standing at her side, Max, had a part to play in that healing. She glanced down at Max, whose gaze had never wavered from Michael's door. Max knew. He had known long before any of them. The way he had reacted in the hospital room, the way he had guarded Michael, despite the betrayal, Max had seen something deeper. He had seen the potential for redemption. "Are you ready, boy?" Margaret whispered, her voice soft but filled with determination. Max's ears flicked in response, his posture remaining steady. He didn't need to answer. He was ready. Inside the hospital room, Michael Thompson lay in a bed, his injuries still evident but healing. The bullet had missed vital organs, but it had left a permanent scar, a reminder of the price of betrayal. His eyes opened slowly as Margaret entered the room, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. He knew what was coming. He had already faced the hardest part, the truth. "Margaret," Michael said weakly, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to say." You don't have to say anything," Margaret interrupted, her voice firm yet compassionate. "The fact that you're here, alive, after everything you did, that's enough for me. You saved him, Michael. You saved Eden when it mattered most. And for that, there is a chance for redemption." Michael's eyes flickered with something, regret, guilt, perhaps even gratitude. But above all, there was a longing for forgiveness that hadn't existed in him until now. He had spent years crafting an image of himself, an officer of justice, a man with honor. But underneath that carefully constructed facade, there was a darkness, a desire for revenge that had clouded his judgment. Max stood silently in the doorway, his eyes locked on Michael. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough. Michael's gaze turned to the dog, and something shifted in his eyes. He recognized the loyalty, the devotion that Max had shown throughout the ordeal. Max had been by his side, despite everything, a reminder of what real partnership and true loyalty looked like. "You were right," Michael whispered, his voice filled with the weight of realization. "I didn't understand what loyalty really was. Not until now. Not until I saw in Max. You, in him, you're not just partners. You're family. I never knew that, but I see it now. I see what I nearly destroyed." Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. "Max saw that in you long before any of us. And because of that, there's a chance for you to heal. But healing doesn't come without a price, Michael. You'll have to face the consequences of your actions. But it's not too late to make things right." Michael's gaze dropped to the bed, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his decisions. The path he had chosen, the road of revenge, of deception, had led him to a place he never expected. But now, with Margaret's words ringing in his ears and Max standing as a silent testament to the power of loyalty, Michael knew there was no going back. There was only forward, into the uncertain path of redemption. Later that evening, Margaret stood outside the precinct, the city lights casting long shadows across the empty streets. Max walked beside her, his steps steady and unhurried, as if sensing that this chapter of their journey was nearing its end. They had uncovered the truth. Michael Thompson had made his choice, and the consequences of his actions were being addressed. But there was still more to be done. The healing had just begun. Margaret knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Michael's redemption was a long road, and it would take time, effort, and the willingness to confront his past. But the bond between a handler and his dog had shown them that anything was possible, even healing in the wake of betrayal. "Well, boy," Margaret said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "We come a long way, haven't we?" Max looked up at her, his eyes full of understanding. The bond they shared wasn't just about working together. It was about growing together, facing adversity, and ultimately healing. Max had been with her through every trial, every heartbreak, and now, with Michael's redemption beginning, they could move forward, knowing that even in the darkest of times, loyalty and love would always light the way. The sky was clear that evening, the first sign of calm after days of storm and uncertainty. In the quiet of the precinct, the weight of the events that had transpired was finally beginning to settle. The truth had been revealed. The betrayal, the loss, and the redemption. Each part of the story had come to its conclusion. But as Margaret stood with Max at her side, she knew that the most important part of the journey was only just beginning. Michael Thompson was well on his way to recovery, both physically and emotionally. His road to redemption was far from easy, but it was a road he had chosen to walk. The decision to betray his own values for revenge had cost him more than he had ever imagined. Yet, through his acts of bravery, his willingness to save Eden's life despite his deep-seated anger, he had found a path to forgiveness. Now, it was up to him to rebuild the trust he had destroyed, to prove that even the darkest past could be redeemed through loyalty, love, and courage. Margaret couldn't help but think back to her son, Eden. The pain of his loss was still fresh. Yet in that painful memory, a sense of peace was starting to take root. Eden had always believed in the power of healing through purpose, through standing by those we loved and trusted. And now, as she stood here, Max at her side, she understood that Eden's spirit lived on, not just in the work he had done as an officer, but in the legacy of love, loyalty, and redemption that was left behind. Max, her steadfast companion, had taught her that no matter how deep the wound, no matter how much time it took to heal, the bond between a handler and a dog could survive even the greatest of losses. It was a bond that didn't need words to communicate. It was a bond that spoke louder than any apology, louder than any promise. As Margaret stood in front of the precinct, Max's presence beside her, she felt a new kind of strength wash over her. It was the strength of knowing that no matter the obstacles ahead, she would face them with purpose, with determination, and with love. The bond between herself and Max would carry them forward, guiding them through whatever challenges lay in their path. Later that week, the department held a formal gathering to address the events that had transpired. Michael Thompson was there, but he was no longer the man he had been when he first walked into the precinct. The shame, the regret, and the guilt that had once weighed on him were now tempered with the beginnings of forgiveness. He stood before the department, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion as he spoke to his fellow officers. I've spent my entire life crafting an image of who I was supposed to be. But in the end, it was that very image that nearly destroyed me. I sought revenge when I should have been seeking redemption, Michael said, his eyes scanning the room. I've learned that redemption doesn't come from revenge. It comes from honesty, from accepting the choices we make, and from showing up every day for those who matter most. There was a long pause as the officers in the room absorbed his words. But it wasn't just Michael's words that carried weight. It was the presence of Max at his side. Max, the German shepherd who had once stood in the shadows of betrayal, now stood as a symbol of loyalty and transformation. His bond with Michael, forged in the heat of battle and tested by the most trying of circumstances, had helped bridge the gap between past mistakes and the promise of a better future. Margaret, standing at the back of the room, watched as Michael spoke. She felt a deep sense of pride, not just for her son, but for Max. The dog would help them both find their way when they had lost sight of the path. When the ceremony was over, Michael approached Margaret, his face sincere and full of gratitude. He had taken the first steps on the long road of redemption, but Margaret knew it wouldn't be easy. Redemption never was. But with Max by his side, Michael had a chance. They all had a chance. Thank you, Margaret, Michael said quietly, for giving me the chance to make things right. Margaret gave him a small nod, her heart full of understanding. You've already started, Michael. You just need to keep walking the path. As the sun set on that quiet evening, Margaret and Max stood outside the precinct, looking out over the city that had become their home. The challenges they had faced had been enormous, but they had come through them stronger together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Margaret had learned something valuable. Her voice filled with both love and finality. We've made it this far. Now, let's see where the road takes us next. Max, ever loyal, turned his head and met her gaze. His eyes spoke volumes, filled with the same unwavering devotion that had carried them through the darkest times. He wasn't just her partner, he was family, and together they would face whatever came next, knowing that no matter how hard the journey, love and loyalty would always light their way. In Chapter 5, the story comes full circle, demonstrating the power of loyalty, redemption, and healing. An unwavering loyalty. This final chapter reminds us that redemption is not a one-time event, but a continuous journey, one that requires courage, effort, and a willingness to change. Have you ever had to walk the difficult path of redemption? What lessons did you learn along the way? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel for more moving stories about loyalty, love, and the incredible bond between humans and dogs.